Welcome in. We're the Real Selection Committee. My name's Mike. This is Greg. And we're coming back to you talking about Ohio State. Last few weeks we've been going over kind of their big games. We went over Texas and we went over Penn State. This week we're going to dive kind of into their whole schedule. Let's just kind of dive into Ohio State. You know, there's a lot of key players moved on, went to the pros. Now, you know, they had to replace 14 players. Now we got a little bit of trying to fill in some spots here. Who's going to be the quarterback's the big question. I know Sayin looks like he's in the lead right now as far as getting the starting position. We got Lincoln Keenholz is right behind him. So it's going to be a battle right up to day one on this schedule here. So is the Big Ten up for grabs, or do you think? How do you think Ohio State's going to fare in the Big Ten here?
Well, we both feel Ohio State's going to fare well. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I kind of think they're the favorite, which to people who don't root for the Buckeyes might sound idiotic. Mm-hmm. Because, like we say, there's a number of guys that moved on to the NFL, but knowing the Buckeyes like we do, they just reload. But I have the Big Ten looking like there's 6 teams that have a legitimate shot at playoffs and potentially winning. Obviously, I got Ohio State, Penn State. They're going to be really strong. Oregon looks really strong. Michigan's going to be good. Illinois, which I really am high on, and Indiana. All 6 of those teams have a shot at nailing down a playoff spot, assuming, like we do, that the Big Ten is going to get 3 teams. But those 6 teams stand out. Now, there's another 4 teams like USC and Washington and Iowa and Nebraska that I feel could play some role in. You know, maybe not so much getting in for the title, but those 4 teams could play a factor. Rutgers graded really strong in my pre-spring game.
Yeah, they're a scrappy
stuff
team.
I worked.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I know a lot of you want to laugh, but that's just the way it is. I mean,
No, I agree. Dark horse for me would be your Minnesota. You know, I think they're going to be in there as a team to beat.
I got Minnesota, Michigan State, Wisconsin, and UCLA that'll all be fighting for that bowl eligibility, which for them teams is a big deal.
Washington.
You know, I got them in tier under Ohio State. And the only bad teams in the Big Ten this year is Northwestern, Purdue, and Maryland. They're set up right now. Looks like they're going to have a long season. But keep an eye on Nebraska.
That's the team,
You know, keep an eye on Nebraska. Yeah. There's a lot of people that are down on them because of that game against Indiana last year. Other than that game, Nebraska played pretty solid football. And I really think they're going to be like the Indiana team this year that kind of does some things. But legitimately, you know, there's 6 teams that really have a good shot.
Yeah.
And if you want me to go down and give my way too early for the playoffs, I feel it's going to be Penn State, Ohio State, and Illinois.
Yeah.
With Oregon and Michigan just sitting there waiting. You know, so that's just the way I see it.
Yeah. So, like, to me, the ESPN's Big Ten favorite is OSU, Ohio State, 40% chance of winning the Big Ten conference, which is funny, you know, as far as the college football playoff rankings preseason coming in. They have Penn State at number 2, and they have Ohio State at 5. So there's some, you know, question marks in there as far as Ohio State's concerned because you got a lot of turnover, and these guys, you know, these new guys going to get starting positions. They're going to have to step up. So
and they will.
Yeah.
But Penn State, the reason Penn State is the favorite in that is because Penn State's got the solid quarterback coming back, and their offensive line is strong. They got more returning guys.
Right.
And so, and I will say this: Penn State is probably set up as good as they've been in a long time.
Oh yeah,
and they will be a problem.
This is their chance to make a run.
Yeah.
As far as running that championship and moving on to the national championship game. Yeah, they got a solid team there, and we talked about them earlier, so go back and look if you haven't watched it. We talked about the Texas matchup with Ohio State, and we talked about the Penn State in depth. I would say go back and watch that if you haven't. They're good. So let's dive into Ohio State's schedule. You know, obviously, that first game is the big game here. It's a noon kickoff game against Texas. We talked about that. That game is going to, I think, set the standard of where Ohio State's going to
Yeah.
play in this Big Ten conference. It ain't the end of the world if they lose it, but I feel good and I feel confident that they could win this game.
I'm pretty confident that Ohio State's the better team, but we do know Texas is really strong too.
A lot of people look for them. You know,
have to give the nod to the quarterback to Texas for the moment.
Yeah.
But like we've talked, Ohio State's team overall we think is just a slight bit better. But that's a game full of pressure. Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. I got it. That is an even pick'em game.
Right. Yeah. That's the set the tone for the season for Ohio State. We talked about that. The quarterback play. Texas already has their guy that they think that's going to lead into the title. What an interesting matchup that game's going to be. So Ohio State starts out with 3 home games after Texas. Then they kind of got their easy games, obviously, like a lot of teams schedule. They got their few non-conference games that they kind of get some work in, where they get some young kids in, and it's going to help out to me as far as getting that offense going, because that first week they're going to be tested. This week is kind of work on a lot more plays, get some of the younger guys in. They're going to go up against Grambling.
Why are we even doing that? I have so much problem with teams like Ohio State and Alabama and the big dogs playing these little guys. I realize they're giving them teams a lot of money to come. They have no chance of doing anything. The only thing that can come out of that game is somebody getting injured or you looking bad. That game, there's so many other teams in the FBS you can schedule. Get away from when you're a team with hopes of going to the national playoffs. Quit scheduling these FCS teams. It's a joke. I hate the only thing I can say I hate about the Buckeyes is scheduling that game. Grambling is not to down their players. Their players are good players, as we've discussed. They're Division I, FCS, but they have no hope of doing anything. And if the game's closer than 82-0, it's a loss as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
quit scheduling that.
And then the thing there is they like to look at as far as the playoffs go. You want to have that better record as well. Kind of bounced last year. Teams with the better records got into the playoffs, so you want a powder puff game here or there.
That game gives you anything. The Ohio U game.
The OU game, which is the following week.
Right, which I don't mind that. Ohio U is a solid mid-major. They're a solid MAC team. They'll give you a decent look. Now they have no chance. They shouldn't have any chance of beating you either. But at least they'll give you a look of what an FBS team is. And when you get your backups in against an Ohio U, they're getting a decent look at what they're going to see. That's all I'm saying there. The first, but for a team like Ohio State with a lot of uncertainty, those 2 games should serve them well, because they should get, especially in Grambling, they should get second, third, fourth level players in. Get some experience.
Yeah. So those games would be like 2 warm-up games, and then they kind of have a rough spot here where the next 3 or 4 games are going to be on the road. The first game being they travel out to Washington, and this game to me could end up being, is it a trap game? Because Washington, the first year in the Big Ten, didn't look very good. Of course, they lost their coach. He moved on to Alabama. And then they had to get a new coach. Plus, they're in a new conference. They lost players to the NFL. They lost Michael Penix. They lost a lot of good players. So I think Washington's going to be a little bit better this year. They're going to be a sneaky game.
That'll be a solid game, and I think it'll be sort of close. The fact that it's out in Washington, but we're coming off a bye.
Yes.
So, but that game doesn't scare me too much. Washington's going to be a good team. I'm not dismissing them, because anything can happen when Washington I have in that second tier in the Big Ten, but I think we'll handle them pretty easily. I don't want to say easily. I think we handle them well. 2 touchdowns, 17 points, somewhere in there. And then Minnesota's up next. Minnesota's one of those teams that just, you don't know what you're getting with it.
Minnesota, they're a scrappy team. You kind of have them in that dark horse kind of team that could prove a point into the
Spoilers.
Big Ten. Could be spoilers, yes, exactly. That's another trap game because
That is more of a trap.
Yeah, that is a home game, for Ohio State, so that's going to help them out. They come back home, and then we go on the road for two more crucial games. The first being the Fighting Illini, who was a 10-win team last year, and we kind of like this team. They have a lot of returning players. They got Luke Altmaier as their starting quarterback, who's been Big Ten honorable mention. He's probably the top 5 in the Big Ten as far as the quarterback position, and they have a lot of depth. Their O-line is there. They have 4 out of the 5 starting offensive linemen are still back. I mean, this team is a very good team. This is the game that I think is a crucial game here, too, that is a kind of a must-win game.
That's a game there that scares me.
Yes.
And, we were talking about the offensive line. The one guy that wasn't a starter played 6 games last year. So this isn't a bum. This is a guy that can play. Illinois scares me. I think there's a solid chance we lose that game. Just because of where it's at in the season and out there. And
we're on the road.
And Illinois is one of those teams that tasted success last year, got the season taken away from them when they played Oregon and got snot kicked. This is a team that, and I got them in the playoffs, so that tells you what I think of Illinois.
Wow, yeah.
I think Illinois is a problem. That's the game that scares me the most on the schedule, personally.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm worried about Illinois because, you're getting into this stretch where you're on the road. You got one home game. You're back on the road again. Are they looking forward to other teams that are coming up? How well they started. And Illinois is a trap game for me. This is a game that this team, if you look at Illinois' schedule, is kind of soft. So this is one of those games that they get up for where Ohio State is kind of have a tough game here, on the road here. Ohio State, could they lose a little bit, looking forward to the next game, stuff like that. So I'm scared about this Illinois game.
The Illinois game is, to me, the one game that could change the season.
Right.
And, that game there really bothers me. Now, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But Illinois, to me, Luke Altmaier is probably the best quarterback that nobody knows, flying under the radar. That offensive line may be the best offensive line in the country. So that right there is reasonable.
Yeah, that's a very veteran team like Ohio State was last year. So you got to kind of watch out for that game there.
Right.
Then the next week, they travel to Wisconsin. And Wisconsin's another one of those teams that they kind of, they like to ground and pound and, eat up the clock and not give the ball back and kind of hide the ball away from Ohio State so that offense can't go out there and explode, which, Wisconsin, I should say, is a team that is another scary game, but I think they can handle them.
I think we beat Wisconsin. Wisconsin's one of those teams, like you say, year in and year out. They're one of them teams in the Big Ten that play well in the Big Ten. They're big, they're strong, they're powerful. They slow the game down. They're consistently good.
Right.
I think we beat them. I'm not really too worried about Wisconsin, but anything can happen in the Big Ten.
So the thing I worry about, do you start out flat against Wisconsin because the game the next week after that is the big one, is Penn State. This is going to be, probably for rights on who's number 1 in the Big Ten mid-season, who's probably the number 1 seeded team in the Big Ten.
Well,
this is going to be the matchup, so do we overlook?
It's possible, but you have a bye after Wisconsin.
Yes. So the byes are coming in good situations.
Kind of takes some of that looking ahead away. So, I'm not so worried about them looking past Wisconsin because I think Ryan Day knows Wisconsin is good enough. If you go out there and lay an egg, Wisconsin can clip you. I'm not saying there's anything to worry about, but in certain circumstances, in the Big Ten, but you got the bye following Wisconsin. Then you got the big one with Penn State. The problem for Penn State over the years is they struggle in the head against Ohio State. It's at Ohio State. But the key to this game, does Ohio State beat Texas? If Ohio State beats Texas and they beat Illinois, I think Ohio State takes care of business. But if they lose one of the 2 games prior to this, that kind of gives the favor to Penn State because I feel Penn State's going to be undefeated going into that game and flying high.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That's a game. Penn State, like I said at the beginning, Penn State's set up. If they ever had a chance to come in there and knock off Ohio State, take the Big Ten and get into the playoffs as a high favored team,
Right.
it's this year.
Right.
That game's going to be tough, but we know that. That's not a game that's going to sneak up on you. Ohio State knows going into that Penn State's going to be good.
Yeah, that's kind of we talked about the James Franklin game, do or die on that one, you know, because he's 1-10 against Ohio State and has lost the last 8 games against Ohio State. So Penn State, good thing for Ohio State is that is a home game.
Yep.
And for some reason, Ohio State just finds a way to win that game.
Yeah.
You know, and I think mid-season is going to help out Ohio State because they're going to get, you know, Sayan's going to get a lot more time in under, you know, the offense is going to start establishing, you know, how powerful they are. They're going to get the passing game down. The running game's going to be there. So, you know, that is the game we put as a check mark on that's going to dictate how Ohio State finishes this year. You know, that's that pivotal game, in my mind, that Penn State game, you know, how they're going to handle that.
Very possibly a preview of the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, I think that is going to be a preview there because, like you said, Penn State's coming into that game, like I think, undefeated because their schedule up to that is not very impressive. You know, they got a bunch of pansies they play all the way till they get to that Ohio State game.
They should roll into Ohio State undefeated.
Yeah.
So,
they have a favorable schedule. So, like you said, that could be a kind of preview of the Big Ten championship game there. And then they move on and play Purdue, which Purdue is probably going to be not as good as, you know, probably another bad year for Purdue.
Purdue's going to be better than last year, but that's not saying a whole lot.
No.
They're still bad.
So then the week after that, we get to play old Nico again. Mr. Tennessee now playing for UCLA. UCLA's kind of, they're a little scrappy team you got to worry about. Don't want to start flat against them, but they should handle business against UCLA. And I think they're 2 touchdown favorites.
Yeah. I mean, Nico's going to help UCLA. I think UCLA is going to be improved, but I don't think they're improved enough to deal with the Buckeyes. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And then the week after UCLA, they got another home game against Rutgers, which they're, like you mentioned earlier, they're a much better team. They're a trap team, I think, as well.
Well, the positioning of it before the Michigan game, and Rutgers is not your typical, you know, last 7-8 years Rutgers where they were bad.
Yeah.
They actually have some experience. They actually, not saying they have a chance at winning the game, but if you go in there and act like this is Purdue, you go in there with your mind on Michigan, Rutgers will give you a fight. So, you know, keep your mind on the games at hand. You got a week to prepare for that game up north.
That's a very good question. You're right. Is this a tune-up game or is this a trap game?
Yeah.
So, you know, is Ohio State going to tune up for the last final game with that team up north that we've had not very good success over the last 4 years?
No success.
Yes. Are we going to right the ship on that game? So now we'll move into that last game against Michigan. You know, it's time to establish Ohio State's offense. Let's not try to dominate and let's not try to go our run game against their strength because Michigan's defense is solid as can be. This team is a top 5, I think, team in college football this season coming up because they are returning some players. They had to fill in from a couple. They lost their interior, you know, Mason Graham and Kenneth Gainwell or Grant. Yes, he moved on to the NFL, so the interior's there. So let's establish the pass game against this game here.
Let's not try to prove we're tough because the one area we know Michigan, especially the last 4 years, is dominant in is the offensive and defensive lines. They just have those bulls. And Michigan has the mindset that they can beat us. And, you know, I'm not going to down Michigan at all. Their quarterback room's better than it was last year.
Yes.
This team is better than they were last year. I think we beat them. But you better have your minds right. And I don't know what's going on in Columbus over the last 4 years. It seems like, and this is not to say it's the reason we lose. It just seems like the Buckeyes don't care about this game as much as Michigan does. You better start caring about it because this Michigan team, their schedule is very light.
Yeah.
Michigan could find themselves coming into this game undefeated.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a lot bigger game than I was giving it credit for
Coming
before.
in. Yeah.
After looking at the schedule, Michigan is they could be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. They as well have an easy schedule.
Yeah.
For next year.
Unusual for Michigan. Michigan usually has tough.
They have that Oklahoma game second week,
Yeah,
which
that'll
could
be
be
tough.
could be kind of telling you how Michigan's
Yeah.
going to fare as their season goes along. But Michigan has some question marks too. You know,
Sure.
like Ohio State.
Will the quarterback
their
do
quarterback
what they
room?
think he will.
You know, is it going to be Bryce Underwood? Is he going to be the starter, or is, you know, that Mikey King transfer? You know, the thing about Michigan is they're going to be better, like you mentioned.
Their quarterback room is a lot better. That Mikey King did well out there in the Mountain West. I think he comes from Fresno State.
Yes, he's from Fresno
he's a
State.
quality quarterback. You still have Davis Warren, who was your starter last year,
Yeah.
who played okay.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't light the world up.
No.
But you got 3 quarterbacks in your room that have experience where last year you had nobody.
Right.
So that automatically makes Michigan a lot better.
Yeah, and then like they got a transfer from Alabama, the running back Justice Haynes
yeah.
coming in, and they had that freshman Jordan Marshall who played at the
Yeah.
end of last year, who had 100 yards against Alabama.
Solid.
So he's going to be a solid run game. So this last game is what we're really concerned about. Can Ohio State establish that defense and kind of stop the run game? Because that's where Michigan has been able to control the game against Ohio State, where they're able to run the ball and have success on a trick play here or there, a gadget play, and catch Ohio State sleeping and, you know, get some big plays on Ohio State. Can they stop that? That's another question. Receivers. Michigan picked up a couple of receivers. This Donovan McCauley came from Indiana, who's going to look like their number one guy because they lost their number one receiver last year for Michigan was Colton Loveland.
Yeah.
He had the most receptions. He's now a tight end for the NFL. So, you know, Ohio State or Michigan has question marks.
They do.
But
and the big thing for Michigan, not to cut you off, Michigan plays a lot of them teams in the second tier. Do you get through those games? Or do you or do they focus so much on Ohio State where these other games get away from them?
Yeah.
Because that kind of happened to them last year.
Yeah, Michigan lost all their big games that they had to play last year.
Yeah.
You know, all the successful teams, they lost to Indiana.
Close.
And Oregon and all those teams went in there and beat them. So can they right the ship and come in and play Ohio State with an unbeaten record?
Certainly looks like Michigan can roll in there potentially undefeated or with only one loss by the schedule I'm looking at.
Yeah, so as far as the schedule is concerned, Ohio State still has a tough schedule coming. And, like you mentioned earlier, Texas and Penn State are preseason 1 and 2. So that's not an easy schedule. So my question is Ohio State going to look at like, hey, last year we dumped 2 games and still made it in? Are they going to come in a little unfocused? Can they control their focus for a 12-game season? Because this is going to be a rough season, I think, for Ohio State at trying to put in some of these young guys and get them rolling. So, it's going to be a struggle trying to, manage that season with some ups and downs, a long road, on the road games. 3 of the 4 games are going to be on the road, so.
When you think about it, honestly, I think if we'd have come back as a veteran-oriented team, the schedule would be, they might lax. But you got so many newer guys in there that don't want to lose, that want to prove they can play. I think that part helps them because these guys want to come in and have their own identity now. But the schedule is tougher than people anticipated, tougher than people think, because they got several of those second-tier teams in there. And like I say, you play 1 and 2 preseason ranked, Texas and Penn State. What other team sports that? You know. Then you got Illinois, which we know is going to be strong. Michigan is going to be tough. And then, like I say, you got Washington, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Rutgers. You got some tough games in there. You don't have a lot of gimmies. You got a lot of games where you're the favorite, solid favorites, but there's not a lot of gimmies.
Yeah, there's this.
Not a lot of gimmies that Ohio State has had, some more in the past. Not a lot of those on the schedule. So it's actually, I think, works to this team's advantage.
All right. So my question, let's go with a quick preseason early. What kind of record? What do you see their record being?
Who, Ohio State?
Yes, Ohio State.
I got them at 11-1.
You got them losing one game.
I think they lose to Illinois.
Wow.
I think that game, there's something about Illinois this year, kind of like the Oregon game last year. I didn't think Oregon was all that great, and I was wrong because Oregon ran the table until the playoffs. But there's just something about Illinois because of where it's at in the season. It's at Illinois. Illinois is a veteran team. We're not. And I just think going on the road to Illinois can be a problem. Yes, do I think Texas is better than Illinois? Probably. But Texas is just in the same boat as us.
Yes.
And we're playing them week 1.
Yes.
I think we have a slightly better team. I give us the nod there. Penn State, we have a knack at beating Penn State. So I actually give us the nod in that game simply based on that fact. And I think this is the year Michigan, we get over the hump with Michigan because Michigan still does have some questions as well. But I'm going to also say it this way. This team, Ohio State, could go 8-4. But I think it's 11-1.
Yes.
10-2 at the worst, but I think 11-1.
Yeah, there's going to be needing some key plays in this game. I am 11-1 as well as you, but I'm going to say their loss is going to be the Penn State. This is the game where Penn State gets their revenge game over all those years that had the good battles. This is the team that they have the veterans, a lot of kids returning. They got the good quarterback. And this game here, as I think Ohio State is going to, they're going to beat Texas. They're going to steamroll the 2 other non-conference games. They're going to struggle with Washington, but manage to win the game. Minnesota, they're going to beat them.
Yeah.
Illinois is kind of a scary game for me, but Ohio State is just going to have a little bit more, a better team. They're going to have 6 games under their belts coming into that game. I think they're going to beat Illinois. A good program. They got a lot of returners, but I still think Ohio State has the better team. I think Ohio State's going to be ready for that game. Wisconsin, I think they're going to handle them, even though it's a scary game. Now we get into the Penn State game that I'm worried about. I think they're going to lose that game in a tight defensive playing game like they always play. They're probably going to lose by a field goal. And then the rest of the games, I think this is a year Ohio State beats Michigan and gets that back on track and they get into the playoffs.
Well, that could very possibly happen. Not a thing wrong with what you said. Shut it up.
Well, that's going to do it. Hey, keep up the like
and
comments.
Yeah.
And hey, like and subscribe. We definitely like for you to help us out so we can keep coming with this fun that we're
drop
having
some
here.
knowledge. We did have a guy drop some knowledge on the Texas
we appreciate
broadcast.
it.
I like that.
Appreciate it.
Much like we know Ohio State, a gentleman commented that knows Texas. We appreciate your comments.
Yeah.
Come
Keep
back.
it up. Yeah. Hey, if you enjoy it, talk to us about it because I know we would love to engage on that. So,
Yes.
hey, we'll see you next week.
Peace.